Welcome back to Planet Doug, and welcome to the Hang Tuah Centre here in Melaka. And if you've been following my story here in Melaka, watching some of my videos, you know that I've become pretty obsessed, at least strongly interested in the story of Hang Tuah. So when I learned that there was an entire museum dedicated to Hang Tuah, his four brothers in arms and their stories, of course, I had to come out here to check it out. That is the main Hang Tuah Centre building right behind me. And then it's actually in the middle of a large complex. So there's actually a separate house here, each one dedicated to one of the five brothers in arms. And then over there is I think it's a building dedicated to Silat, the Malaysian martial arts. And these four men, you can see their names up here on this on this sign up there at the top: Hang Tuah, Hang Jebat, Hang Kasturi, Hang Lakir, Hang Lekyu. Pronunciation, well, you can tell me how they're supposed to be pronounced. Those five men are legendary warriors from Malaysian history. And they are all skilled, or they all were skilled in Silat, the martial art. And I think that building over there is dedicated to Silat. So yeah, here it is. And I haven't been inside yet. I don't know anything about the place. It's going to be brand new to me. Of course, I got out here by bicycle. There's my bike there, locked up. Yeah, bicycle, it's not the best way to get out here. When you come to a complex this big, you kind of want to be fresh, cool, dry when you get here. And getting here by bicycle delivers you the exact opposite: hot, tired, drenched in sweat, a little bit flustered, a little bit confused, because it's 9 kilometers from my hotel. I didn't realize it was quite that far, but by the time I got here, I'd cycled 9 kilometers according to Strava. And that took me down busy highways, crazy intersections, one-way dipsy doodles to get across highway systems, other one-ways. It was not easy getting out here by bicycle, let me tell you. So yeah, don't do that. Come out here by grab car, your own car, whatever you got, scooter. Don't come out here by bicycle unless you're crazy like me. And it's also a little bit hard to find because it has so many different names. It's the Hang Tuah, in English, the Hang Tuah Centre, the Hang Tuah Museum, and then you see it in Malay with all kinds of different names. So every time you see a sign out in the world, it uses a different name, either in Malay or in English. It switches back and forth. Different color coding for the different signs. So I found myself checking Google Maps over and over again. Whew, let me go back to my bicycle. I need my little towel just to dry off a bit before I go inside. The Planet Doug dish towel. It is so hot and humid today. Crazy humid. I swear I was like I was taking a shower my whole way here. It's like I've been cycling through a film of water. The air is like water today. So yeah. Let's head inside. I was more than a little bit concerned that it would not be open today. I'm never quite sure on opening hours of anything in Malaysia. So, all right, so there's the tickets down there. For foreigners, it is 20 ringgit, or perhaps 10 ringgit for a senior citizen. I'm not sure if that's they have that price here, and they have a do it now QR code. So that's how I'm hoping to pay. Hello, just one?
20 ringgit.
Do you have a price for senior citizens?
No.
No? Okay. Touch and go, please.
Yes.
Okay.
You can touch.
Yeah, right there.
Okay, you can enter this museum, and we have a 5 house.
5 houses.
Yes, inside the museum.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. There you go. There's your ticket. No price No discount for senior citizens like me, 20 ringgit for foreigners, and it's cashless. So even if you had money, you can't pay with money. You have to have an e-wallet or pay with some kind of a card. But yeah, I paid with the power of touch and go, which I enjoy very much. And she told me that they have 5 buildings. This is the main one, the Hang Tuah Centre. Let's go over here first and look at the statues of the famous 5 brothers in arms. And I've talked a lot about these guys, mainly from the point of view of how you, like as a foreigner, you see their names everywhere. So there you can see it in English again, Hang Tuah, and there's Hang Kasturi, etc. So the streets are named after these men, shopping centers are named after them, buildings are named after them. So any foreigner that visits Malaysia will come across these 5 names everywhere they go, and yet unless you go seeking out museums, you will probably come to Malaysia, stay for 2 weeks, go home, and you will never know the significance of any of these names. So that's sort of how I'm approaching the story of Hang Tuah. I think his story is very important, and foreigners should know about it in order to come to Malaysia and appreciate its history. Starting on the far right, there's Hang Lekir, Hang Kasturi, Hang Tuah, and now Hang Jebat. His name is most commonly associated with Hang Tuah. Their story is joined, the most famous story about these 5 men, and Hang Lekir. And you can see that they each have a dagger in their waistband. And the story of Hang Tuah's dagger is very well known. The Keris, the Taming Sari. But rather than tell that whole story here, I already know the basics. I'm hoping that as we go through the museum will tell us the story. Yeah, beautiful building, beautiful entranceway. Let's hope it is air conditioned on the inside. On Google Maps, I was reading through the reviews, and a lot of reviews from like years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, said they wished there was more interactive exhibits. But then when I read up on the museum now, today, it says that they've done like a multi-million ringgit renovation, and they've recently added all kinds of new exhibits, including multimedia interactive exhibits. So we'll see how that turns out. People were asking for multimedia interactive exhibits, and they say they added them. So yeah, and this is a big auditorium over there. I don't know whether they have any like scheduled movies that they're showing. As far as facilities go, I think I'm being let down again by Malaysia's vending machines. They have a lot of vending machines, and I was hoping to get a bottle of cold water, but as you can see, it's completely out of stock. All red lights. I don't see any green lights at all, so I don't know whether I can get any drinks here at all. They do have bathrooms here. I saw them on the sign, and they do have an ice cream machine over here. This one is a newer machine. I saw one of these down at the Submarine Museum, and it worked very well, so I got a nice cup of ice cream. But it doesn't look like I can get a drink, unfortunately. Maybe there's going to be another, like a cafe or something. We'll find out on the way inside. But anyway, bring your own drinks, as always, because you can't count on the dreaded Malaysian vending machine. Contact Atlas Oasis and tell them that people on planet Doug are thirsty, and we can't get any drinks. Update, I did get a cold drink. So some of them are in stock, but the problem is none of them have the green light. So what you do is you press the touch to start button down on the screen there. And then after you press touch to start, then it says make your selection. And then I just pressed on one of the buttons at random for Lipton iced tea. And then they told me how much to pay. I scanned a QR code using the power of touch and go, and I got my cold drink. But as you can see, the buttons don't light up green, but if you push on it and it starts flashing, you know it's there. So that's the secret. But from a distance, it looks like it has nothing because there's no green lights anywhere. The secret is if it's blank, then they have it. But I didn't know that. Other facilities, they have Wi-Fi. It works. I tested it. So you can call up that Wi-Fi network, and it's completely free, no password. You just touch that network and you're logged on immediately, which is cool. And no shoes. So you leave your shoes. There's a rack down there where you leave your shoes behind. And let's go inside. Masuk entrance. First impressions, beautiful, stunning on the inside. Look at all of this polished wood. That is gorgeous. High ceilings right up above me in the main lobby. That's gorgeous. And there's a quote from Hang Tuah. Never shall Malays vanish from the earth as long as they adhere to the religion of Islam. Hang Tuah. Beautiful drawing of the Hang Tuah Centre, or I suppose that could be the palace, the Sultanate Palace in Melaka as well. That's probably what it is. Video display of the museum's exhibits. Look at this. That is gorgeous. And even if the vending machine on the outside fails you, you can get water here. So it's sort of a, you can pay with the power of touch and go or honor system. You can just put 2 ringgit into the little container there. Very nice display of Hang Tuah and his main companion, Hang Jebat. And they have the story of Hang Tuah down here, that he is the main character in the epic of Hang Tuah. So he is an admiral under the rule of the Melaka Sultanate. And they talk about this man, Hang Jebat, as his closest companion, and where Hang Tuah is renowned for his fighting ability, but also for his trustworthiness, his sense of reason, and loyalty to authority. His friend Hang Jebat is more impulsive, perhaps more emotional, and that ties in with the legend of these 2 men. And the men beside him, this is the Sultan of Melaka from the time, and then the Prime Minister. And there are many legends about Hang Tuah. Here they call him, you'll see this word quite often, Laksamana, and in English you could translate that as admiral. So he is the Admiral of Melaka, dating back to the 15th century. He grew up here near Melaka, on the banks of the river Duyung, Sungai Duyung, and apparently he mastered 12 languages, completed a study of the Quran, and Hang Tuah and his companions traveled across the seas and faced pirates. And his courage was so evident that when he returned to Melaka, the Sultan invited him and his friends to serve as knights in the Melaka Palace. And in my other videos from the museums of Melaka, I often referred to Hang Tuah and his friends as similar to the Knights of the Round Table. So if you want like a short way to understand the story of Hang Tuah, you can think of Hang Tuah and his 4 companions as England's, the knights of the Round Table. They are the legendary warriors of Malaysia. They have a really nice small theater. I'm sitting in the theater right now, and there's a show called Hang Tuah, the Malay Warrior. I have already seen the entire video. It's quite good, quite interesting. The animation is really beautiful, and they have very clear English subtitles along the bottom. But yeah, you can see the theater, very beautiful. It's a small theater, but plenty of seating, and they show this movie very, very quickly, over and over again. Very good audio as well. There it is there. The Hang Tuah Malay Warrior Theater. But I was disappointed in that film because it really skipped over the story of Hang Tuah and Hang Jebat. And from what I read in the subtitles, it didn't get it right. It actually just said that Hang Jebat betrayed Hang Tuah, and then Hang Tuah killed him. That's all it said. And that's not the story at all that I read elsewhere. It's a really fascinating story, but here they didn't seem to get the story correct. They give a very short version of it, and I don't think they got their facts right, which is kind of disappointing. They have a lot of information about Melaka as a trading center for the world, talking about all the products that are bought and sold back in those centuries, and the various languages and cultures and currency that were common in Melaka. And this is some of the interactive exhibits that I was talking about. This is quite cool. They give information about international trade in Melaka, and they have a map of the world. So if you want to get information about trade with India, you press this button on India, and then it gives you a map that talks about things that were imported from India: weapons, medicines, opium, Arabian fabric, and they trace the path of the ships from India to Melaka and who their trading partner was. And here, Siam or Burma, and it lists all the objects that were traded with that kingdom, and then you can go all the way around the world. Very, very interesting. Back here you can see just how beautiful this museum is. It's worth coming here just to see the building, to be honest. And there's the theater where I was sitting just now. All about the epic of Hang Tuah. A mild critique, and I have this critique of almost all museums, is that the information, the text is just way too small, way too dark, and for people like me, way too low. So here's a whole an information screen about Hang Tuah. Well, there's no way I'm bending over for 20 minutes to try and decipher that. It's, the text is so small and it's so dark. I can't really read anything there. And most of the displays have this sort of dense text that's pretty much impossible to read because it's too dark. Even this information about silat, the martial art, it's just, for me, the text is always way too low. I have to bend over to read it, and then it's too dark, and the text is way too small. I need something big, I need a huge banner that tells me that this is about world trade, right? Just lay it out for me, because all of this text is just, way too small. Yeah, this is much better right here. This is what I like. I can stand at a comfortable distance and just read this. And that works out a lot better in a museum. This is one area where the interactive displays might have outsmarted themselves, because this is entirely digital interactive, but it took me, 10 minutes to figure out how to work it. I really had to be a detective, because it says slide the screen, right? So I was busy, you know, trying to do that. But I finally figured out what you have to do is actually move the entire screen and line up the arrows along the bottom. So here we have a display of something important in Hang Tuah's life. And to learn about it, you have to take this screen, move it in front of that display, line up the arrows, and then the video will play. Check this out. So we move it. There's the arrow. Line it up here. Boom. And now the video plays automatically. But I'm telling you, you have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure that out. I completed the journey. I moved the screen from one side all the way to the other, carefully lining up the arrows, and I heard all the stories. This is the most important story, this one here. This one tells the story of how Hang Tuah, acquired the famous, powerful Keris, the Taming Sari. He went to Majapahit, the kingdom which is now on what we call Sumatra today, and then he fought a legendary warrior there named Taming Sari. And this warrior, Taming Sari, was essentially invulnerable. No one could defeat him or even harm him because his Keris had magical, powerful properties. But then Hang Tuah managed to trick him in the battle and switched daggers. So Hang Tuah, he got the magical Keris with the powers, and using it, he was able to defeat Taming Sari. And that Keris is now known as the Taming Sari. That's my understanding of the story anyway. But yeah, a lot of these stories, they're clearly epics, like legend and myth, not necessarily meant to be taken literally, I don't think, because like in this story, he defeated 70 men all at one time. That's how the story goes, that an enemy trapped Hang Tuah in a market with 70 soldiers, and then Hang Tuah managed to defeat all 70 of them single-handedly by retreating into a narrow alleyway and defeating them one by one. And in this story, he defeated 5 or 6 skilled Japanese warriors all at the same time. And then in the final story here, he defeated a Japanese ship in naval battle and took a lot of gold and jewelry from that Japanese ship. And then as you go throughout the displays, you find out that Hang Tuah could speak 12 languages, was a master of all of these martial arts. He was a great singer, amazing dancer. He basically could do anything. Like here is another portrait of Hang Tuah, and it says that he was highly skilled in the performing arts as well as a singer and dancer. So basically, he's like an epic figure of myth and legend from Malaysian history. But very cool stories about him, though. This is quite strange and a bit disappointing to me that this whole hallway behind me, this is telling the epic tale of Hang Tuah and Hang Jebat, but it tells 2 different versions of the story. There's one version on this side and a completely different version on the other side, which is a bit weird. On this side, they're telling the story that I'm familiar with and that I admire very much. The basic details are that someone in the Sultan's court was jealous of Hang Tuah and made false accusations against him. And because of these false accusations, the Sultan ordered Hang Tuah to be executed. Though the man who was told to carry out the execution, he didn't believe the accusations were true. So instead of executing Hang Tuah, he took him and hid him in the jungle or in the mountains somewhere. But everybody thought Hang Tuah had been executed by the Sultan. They thought the sentence had been carried out, and Hang Jebat, Hang Tuah's best friend, was so upset about this that he rebelled against the Sultan. So, as I talked about earlier, Hang Jebat was more of an impulsive, he was more loyal to his friends than he was loyal to authority. So even though the Sultan was the authority, the man in power, he rebelled against him on behalf of his friend, Hang Tuah. So Hang Jebat was leading a rebellion against the Sultan, and then the Sultan learned that Hang Tuah was still alive. So he actually called Hang Tuah back and ordered Hang Tuah to put down the rebellion and fight against his friend, Hang Jebat. So this sort of tragic set of circumstances about loyalty to authority or to your friends created this tragedy where Hang Tuah and Hang Jebat were forced to fight each other because Hang Tuah was loyal to the Sultan and carried out the order to put down the rebellion, and it ended with a duel between Hang Jebat and Hang Tuah. And because Hang Tuah had the legendary Keris, the Taming Sari, and was the more skilled warrior, he defeated Hang Jebat and killed his friend. So, I mean, it's a great story, like Shakespearean in its themes and things like that. And that's a story I know. But then on this side, they have this big holographic display, and you can choose between Malaysian or English. I've already listened to the whole thing. Hey, here, I'll just push the button and you can see a little bit of it. So you push the button and there's the story from this speaker up here, and you get this holographic image, and then another one down here on the left and the right, which is quite interesting right there. I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's the fight between Hang Jebat and Hang Tuah. But the story they tell there has none of the detail of the story that I just told. According to this version of the story, Hang Jebat and Hang Tuah were just sort of hanging out at the palace, and they had an argument about loyalty to the Sultan. And then out of nowhere, their argument got so strong that they started fighting. So they're basically just having a discussion. The discussion spiraled into an argument. They both took out their weapons and they fought each other, and then Hang Tuah killed him over this argument. So that makes no sense to me at all. There's no ethics, there's no morality, there's no themes to that story at all. So I have no idea why they tell two completely opposite versions of the story. I don't like this one at all. This one doesn't make any sense to me. But the display is really quite interesting. There again, you can see the holographic display of the fight. So that's very cool. Yeah, it's a very cool display, but the story is completely wrong as far as I'm concerned. This is another aspect of Malaysia's history that I learned about in Melaka and I find fascinating. It's the story of the ships of Melaka, especially this one, the Mandam Berahi ship. And you learn about this ship in the epic of Hang Tuah, a famous manuscript telling the life and the story of Hang Tuah. And when Hang Tuah was an envoy and a diplomat, he sailed around this part of the world on this massive ship called the Mandam Berahi. And the Portuguese write about this as well, that when they arrived in Melaka, they encountered huge ships, much bigger than their own ships from Portugal that they were sailing around the world on. And they were astonished at how big these ships were. And one of them, may have been the legendary Mandam Berahi. But you don't hear about these ships too often in Malaysia unless you go to museums like this. And I don't know if they've ever discovered the remains of any of these huge ships. Yeah, very interesting displays here. Another example of an interactive one here. it shows a royal parade with all of the elements. And on the screen there that woman is pressing, you can actually click on any one of these characters in the parade or any of the objects that they're carrying, and then it gives you a summary of who that person is in the royal court, information about their clothing, their umbrellas, the animals, weapons, anything at all that's inside the royal parade. Yeah, the display works quite well. A close-up of the royal parade. So there's the parade on the main screen, and then down here there's an interactive menu. Click to start, and now you can select which part of the royal parade you want to learn about. So the king with elephants, press on that, and then now we can select what we want to learn about. Of course, we want to learn about the elephant. And then up there, you get a close-up of the elephant with the story of what the significance of the elephant is. There's the royal umbrella. So the yellow patterned umbrella is reserved for the children of kings and nobles. So that is part of the royal parade. So yeah, you see what I mean? You can go through the entire parade and click on any of the people or any of these objects. So there's the short kris. Let's learn about that. And then up here on the main screen, made from an old kris blade with hilt and sheath covered in gold. This one is carried only by the Yang di Pertuan Agong, only carried by the king. So yeah, very cool display. Kids would have a lot of fun with that, I think, at least briefly. Back outside, came to the end of all the exhibits in there. Yeah, angling my GoPro downward so you can see the full Hang Tuah Museum behind me, or the Hang Tuah Centre, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, verdict on that part of it? Absolutely, Planet Doug approved. As long as you can make it out here. As I said, don't come out here by bicycle. I'm still soaked in sweat, like all through that museum. My shirt, I could just twist it and get a cup of water out of my shirt. But yeah, it's a beautiful building, a lot of interesting information, almost entirely about Hang Tuah, which kind of surprised me. I know it is the Hang Tuah Centre, you know, the Hang Tuah Museum, so it makes sense that it's mainly about that man, or at least the myth, the legend, the stories, the fables, the historical stories about Hang Tuah. But you also pick up on some information about Melaka as a trading center, and the interactive exhibits are very cool. Of course, there were a number of them in there that weren't working anymore. That's the risk you take with those fancy interactive ones. There was a bunch of them where they had footprints on the ground, and then you're supposed to put your feet in the footprints, and there's a big screen in front of you and cameras, and something was supposed to happen, I think, where you were projected into a scene, something quite fancy, but none of those were working. They all had signs on them saying, sorry, under repair. So yeah, when you go very, very high tech, you run the risk of your technology letting you down. But yeah, and of course, if I'm nitpicking, which is what I do on Planet Doug quite often, a lot of the information was way too dense in the text, way too small, dark lettering, and way too low. I need something big and dramatic that I can just read from a distance. But other than that, yeah, very interesting. And out here, there are the buildings, each one from the main sign labeled according to the companions of Hang Tuah, and I don't really know what they're about. at all. But yeah, it's a beautiful piece of land back here with all of these traditional buildings. Yeah, quite beautiful. This one is the Rumah Hang Kasturi, so the Hang Kasturi house. I think Rumah means house or building, something like that. And that's what I was thinking, that in the Hang Tuah Museum, his 4 companions kind of got short shrift. There wasn't much information. There really wasn't any information about Hang Kasturi at all when you went in there. Oh, and here the sign says Rumah Hang Tuah. I thought this was Rumah Hang Kasturi. Maybe the labeling is not quite accurate. As I said, I haven't been through these buildings at all, so I don't know what is supposed to be here, other than I think maybe it's just to see a traditional Malay house and the furniture from that era. I don't know if there's any museum-style exhibits with information. Yeah, some signs on the wall here about clothing, things like that. Traditional Malay fabrics. But again, yeah, there's no way I'm bending over to read that. It's just way too small. I need a magnifying glass to make out any of that information. So yeah, I think the main point of this house is basically to show you a house and some traditional furnishings. Just to show you how these buildings were constructed. Beautiful garden area, that is for sure. You can see how much heavy rain we've been having all of a sudden. It's been very dry in Malaysia, and out of nowhere, the rain has just been thundering down at night all of a sudden. And we're standing in front of another one of the houses here. Yeah, beautifully landscaped, very well taken care of. There's a lot of gardeners out here, keeping things neat and tidy and trimmed. Yeah, the houses that I've been into haven't had a very strong theme or set of collections on the inside. I think the main point is the building itself, just to see what they look like and make a nice garden out of it. And then each of Hang Tuah's companions gets a house with their name on it, even if they don't have information about them in the museum. They each get a house. So there's the Rumah Hang Lekir over there. Yeah, so that's a nice one, like a cottage. And on the inside, the interior is sort of just some stuff, a random assortment of items from Malaysia's history that they put on the walls and in the rooms, just whatever, I guess, whatever items they could find to fill out the house. But yeah, it's worth checking them out. And we've reached the end. Back at the entrance, I'm going to get another cold drink before I head over to the Hang Tuah well. I just wanted to point out that they have bathrooms here, right here, inside the museum itself. And it's wheelchair accessible. So they actually have quite a large ramp here. Access for wheelchairs, baby strollers, that sort of thing. Just kind of rare. Just thought I'd point that out. Before I leave the Hang Tuah Museum main grounds, maybe just a couple other thoughts about, is it worth coming all the way out here for this? I mean, when you put the whole package together, probably. We're in a beautiful part of the countryside here. We're actually next to a nice river. The grounds are very beautiful. The buildings are beautiful. The only thing now that I'm thinking about it is the focus of the museum is pretty narrow when, as I've talked about, it is all about the story of Hang Tuah and a little bit about Melaka, the history of the kingdom, the Malacca Sultanate, as it all relates to Hang Tuah. But it is kind of a narrow focus. I was expecting at least one display about poor Hang Kasturi, who gets, ignored quite a bit. But yeah, it's all Hang Tuah, and then the story, the epic tale of Hang Tuah and Hang Jebat. And yeah, so in terms of the subject matter, it's fairly narrow in terms of the subjects that it covers, the topics that it covers. But yeah, quite an interesting place to check out. And before I leave here, I'm going to go back up the hill. There's a hill here, and then there's a well, the Hang Tuah well. And I think the legend is that Hang Tuah himself dug the well. And I think there was something about this well that you could draw up some water, and if you douse yourself with that water, maybe you take on some of the attributes of Hang Tuah. You become brave and loyal and trustworthy. I'm not sure. I read that somewhere. But anyway, since it's nearby, the well of Hang Tuah, I thought I would ride my bike there, take a look at it, and then I will end the video there. It wasn't easy, but I found the well of Hang Tuah. It was actually pretty easy in a way, because when I rode out from the museum, I looked to my right, and there was this area filled with souvenir shops like this one behind me, all kinds of toys and decorations and souvenirs. And there's a whole bunch more up there. And I thought, oh, that must be where the well is. Maybe. But then there was a big sign that said, well, that way. So I followed the arrow. It took me way up to the top of a hill, down the other side. And then I was like, I just could not find the well anywhere. So I turned around, ignored the sign, ignored the arrow, and came back here to where I saw all these souvenir shops. And here it is, the well. The sign just pointed me in the wrong direction. Oh, look at that. The water is very close to ground level. The sign says it's 16 feet deep. But yeah, it's got the water from the well of Hang Tuah. Yeah, laterite around the outside. And apparently, yeah, it was dug by Hang Tuah. Yeah, for YouTube. Yeah. And they even have a little funnel here if you wanted to fill up with water in a bottle, to take home with you. So it's my turn to get some water from the well of Hang Tuah. Pocho? So there's some water. See if I can become brave like Hang Tuah. Okay. Yeah. There we go. Okay. So I guess here at the well of Hang Tuah, I'll call an end to this video. Yeah, I enjoyed that quite a bit. Of course, I got the full-on experience of coming out here, riding my bike 9 kilometers through a new part of Melaka that I hadn't seen before. And of course, I already knew the whole story of Hang Tuah and Hang Jebat, Hang Kasturi. I'd read up quite a bit about all these guys. So that museum had a lot of meaning for me. It does strike me that, like for the typical tourist, a foreigner coming to Malaysia for the first time, if they came to that museum, they may not get as much out of it because they don't know, okay, here's a whole museum telling me a whole bunch of stuff about this guy called Hang Tuah, but what's his significance? Like, why should I care about him? What is his relationship to modern day Malaysia? Like, it feels a little bit like the museum is laid out for a Malaysian audience. They already know who this guy is. They already know he's important. how he connects to Malaysia's history. But then for a foreigner like me, we kind of need the Cliff's notes, you know, we need the shorthand, like lay it out for us, like who is this guy, why should we care about him, and then what's his importance in Malaysian history. And there isn't a lot of that there. But still, I mean, if you read between the lines, of course, you can start to pick it up, exactly who he was and why he's important in the history of Malaysia and to Malaysian people. And then you can finish off your visit. Yeah, like I said, this well is very, very close to the museum. It's like right around the corner. You don't have to go way up the hill like I thought you had to. You can just walk here from the museum. So if you do come to the museum, yeah, it's a good idea to come check out the well at the same time. Maybe even bring a water bottle. And then you can bring some home. You know, bring some Hang Tuah water home with you. So that's very cool. Gives a nice tactile ending to your visit to the Hang Tuah Centre, the Hang Tuah Museum. All right, that is it. Shutting down. Shout out to all of my Crunch Club members out there. If you've watched this video all the way to the end, makes you a member of the Planet Doug Crunch Club. Put CC in the comments to let me know. And yeah, thank you to everyone supporting me, supporting Planet Doug. You can do that through Touch and Go, through PayPal, through the Planet Doug Patreon. And there are links to all of that at the end of the video. And right after this conclusion, I'm going to stick in a 3D flyover map that shows you exactly where I went on my bicycle today, the route coming out here to the museum, and now the route going back to my hotel. That is actually going to be a second video that I'm starting right now. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that. One of the last places I'll check out in Melaka perhaps before hitting the road. We'll see how things turn out. So that's it. Shutting down. See you next time.